President Prabowo Subianto sat quietly in his private study at the Istana Bogor when his secretary entered, holding a crisp white envelope stamped with the seal of the United Nations. Inside was an invitation to speak at the Global Peace and Unity Summit in New York. The summit promised the attendance of key world leaders, former U.S. presidents, and peace activists. But it came at a time when tensions in Southeast Asia and the Middle East were fragile, and Indonesia was expected to stay neutral. Initially, Prabowo hesitated. His instincts as a military man told him that words rarely won wars. But his heart, shaped by years of growth, whispered that this was something more. That evening, during a quiet moment with K.H. Anwar, a well-known spiritual figure in Solo, the cleric said something that struck a chord. Sometimes God sends the warrior not to fight, but to speak. That line echoed in Prabowo's mind for hours. Surprisingly, the real push came from someone unexpected, his young niece. At dinner, she showed him a viral TikTok video of war footage from Gaza, overlaid with a child's plea for peace. Tears welled up in her eyes as she asked, "Uncle, can you help them?" Prabowo looked at the screen in silence. That night, he signed the acceptance letter to the UN with trembling hands. The presidential aircraft, Garuda 1, lifted off into the clear morning sky, carrying Prabowo and his closest advisors toward New York. The cabin was quiet, filled with a sense of anticipation. Prabowo sat near the window, flipping through drafts of his speech, none of which felt quite right. Something was missing, heart. As the plane crossed the Pacific, he remembered an old journal entry he once wrote during his early military days in East Timor, after witnessing a mother carry her injured child through a war zone. He retrieved that journal from his suitcase and found the page, now yellowed with time. Inspired, he tore out the page and began rewriting his speech from scratch, pouring his soul into it. Just before landing, his chief of staff handed him a sealed envelope marked confidential. Inside was intelligence. Donald Trump would not only attend the summit, but had specifically asked for a seat near the front. Prabowo raised an eyebrow. "Why would he do that?" he murmured. No one had an answer. The game had just changed. The lobby of the United Nations building in New York was alive with diplomatic tension and elite glamour. Presidents from Europe, Middle Eastern royalty, and former heads of state, including Barack Obama and Angela Merkel, were ushered into private waiting rooms. Cameras flashed. The press speculated about who would steal the spotlight. Donald Trump arrived unexpectedly early, causing a stir. His security detail was minimal, and his expression unreadable. When asked by reporters why he came, he simply said, "Curious to hear what the Indonesian has to say." His words sent waves through the crowd. Despite stepping away from politics, Trump still commanded headlines. He sat in the front row, directly across from the main podium. In a separate lounge, Prabowo prepared quietly. Instead of reviewing notes, he spent the final moments in prayer. What startled his team was when he gave away his designer tie and wristwatch to a janitor he met backstage, saying, "You'll look better in this than I do." The gesture was caught on a security camera and would later go viral before the speech even began. Western delegates exchanged cautious glances in the moments before the summit. Some feared Prabowo might use his speech to criticize Western involvement in the Middle East. Intelligence teams had even flagged the Indonesian president's choice of metaphors in past speeches as nationalist and unpredictable. In private chambers, Israeli and Iranian diplomats were already on edge, watching closely for any wording that might indicate bias. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's crown prince whispered to his advisor, "If this man brings religion into politics, we walk." Even allies of Indonesia like Malaysia and Turkey were unsure how far Prabowo would go in speaking of adab and faith. But then, a secret email leaked to media just an hour before the summit. It was from a White House official, claiming that President Prabowo was approached to help mediate informal ceasefire talks between rebel leaders in the Middle East. The summit hadn't even begun, and already, Prabowo was shaping the headlines in ways no one anticipated. As the world's eyes turned to the grand stage, Prabowo arrived, not in a bulletproof car, but walking quietly with only 2 aides, wearing traditional Indonesian batik instead of a suit. Gasps spread through the crowd. It wasn't arrogance, it was reverence. He bowed deeply toward the crowd before taking his seat in the second row, refusing the VIP chair reserved for him. When it was his turn to speak, Prabowo walked slowly to the podium, pausing to greet a disabled war veteran in the front row with a full military salute. Then he turned to the microphone and stood silently for a full 30 seconds. The room grew tense. Was it a technical error? Was he unsure? Then he began. In silence, I heard the cries of children buried under rubble. In silence, I heard the prayers of mothers hoping their sons return. The surprise came not in his words, but in his tone, gentle, poetic, without blame or anger. When he ended the first part of his speech with a quote from a Jewish rabbi about peace and a verse from the Quran about mercy, the hall burst into spontaneous applause. Even Trump, caught on camera, appeared visibly moved, but tried to hide it by shifting in his seat. That single moment was shared 18 million times online within the next hour. As President Prabowo continued his address, the room grew increasingly still. His words wove a tapestry of pain, reflection, and hope. He spoke of Palestine and Israel not as enemies, but as neighbors held hostage by wounds too deep to heal with weapons. True peace, he said, is not when guns are silent, but when hearts stop seeking revenge. Donald Trump, known for his bravado and iron presence, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then something completely unexpected happened. His eyes began to well up. A single tear fell, caught on camera by a CNN photographer. The image was instantly broadcast worldwide. The famously stoic Trump emotionally shaken by a former general from the Far East. Backstage, even Prabowo's aides were stunned. He cried, one whispered, watching the replay on their phones. No one has ever made him cry. The crowd's applause turned into a standing ovation. For the first time, Prabowo realized this wasn't just a speech. It was a spiritual moment. Something bigger than politics was unfolding. After the speech, Prabowo quietly exited the main hall, avoiding interviews. He walked toward a private room reserved for rest, escorted by a single UN official. As he passed a narrow hallway, he was stopped by a familiar voice behind him. "Mr. President." It was Trump alone, with no cameras, no entourage. What followed was not a handshake or photo op, but a whisper. Trump leaned in and said, "I need to speak with you. In private, not as a politician, as a man who's made too many enemies and lost too many friends." Prabowo looked at him curiously, nodding without a word. The two disappeared into a side room for nearly 25 minutes. No one knows what was discussed. When they emerged, Trump's demeanor had shifted. He looked lighter, almost humbled. Later that evening, a tweet appeared on Trump's X, formerly Twitter, account. "I thought I understood strength. But today, I learned it can wear batik and speak like a poet." The tweet exploded. The world knew something had changed. But what? That night, diplomatic circles buzzed with rumors. Had Trump offered Prabowo a secret deal? Was he planning a comeback into politics? Or, more shocking, had he confessed to something? Meanwhile, Prabowo stayed silent. He spent the evening walking alone in Central Park, under light security, dressed in a simple jacket and cap. What no one knew was that earlier in the day, Prabowo had received a secret file from a Middle Eastern envoy. Inside were photos, maps, and coordinates, proof of an unreported missile facility being built illegally near a school zone. The envoy begged Prabowo to use his rising influence to expose it during the next UN session. Instead, Prabowo took a different route. The next morning, in a closed-door emergency session, he offered a three-party peace initiative involving Indonesia as a neutral observer, with support from the Vatican and Norway. He didn't reveal the missile base. He promised to resolve it through back-channel diplomacy. The room, filled with skeptics the day before, erupted in handshakes. 2 days after the summit, back in Indonesia, a letter arrived at the presidential palace. It was handwritten, smudged with fingerprints, and delivered via a UNICEF staffer who had just returned from Gaza. The letter was from a 12-year-old boy named Amir, who had seen the summit on a dusty TV in a refugee tent. "I don't know who you are," Amir wrote, "but my father said your words sounded like a soldier who knew pain. He cried while watching. That was the first time I saw my father cry. Thank you for speaking peace like someone who's been in war." The letter was signed with a child's drawing of a dove, shaded in with charcoal. Prabowo sat silently after reading it. He handed the letter to his defense minister without a word. Then, in a rare break from schedule, he requested a national broadcast, not to speak as president, but to read Amir's letter live. It aired across Indonesia and millions wept. And far away, a photo surfaced on social media. Donald Trump watching the broadcast alone in a Florida room, wiping his face again. Just when the world thought the story had ended, it took another unexpected turn. A letter, written in Hebrew, arrived at the Indonesian embassy in Washington. It was from an Israeli general, now retired, who had once commanded strikes during the Gaza conflict. "I've never agreed with your country," the letter read, "but I've listened to your president's speech 4 times now." And I cried. What made the letter remarkable was not the words. It was what accompanied it, a poem, written by the general himself, titled "The Enemy Who Showed Me God." The poem compared war to fire, and peace to a whisper that only the humble can hear. When it was translated and read on Indonesia's Metro TV, it stunned the nation. In response, President Prabowo published his own poem, this time handwritten in Javanese, translated into Hebrew, Arabic, and English. The title, "Even Lions Need Sleep." It was the first time in history an Indonesian president responded to military conflict not with bullets or sanctions, but with poetry. The world had no choice but to pay attention. Late one evening, as President Prabowo was reviewing economic reports at Merdeka Palace, his secretary rushed in. "Mr. President, it's the White House. President Harris is on the line." Surprised, Prabowo picked up the receiver. Vice President Kamala Harris had recently assumed the presidency after a sudden resignation. Her voice was calm but urgent. "I wanted to thank you personally," she said. "Your speech, your approach, has opened doors we never thought possible. We're considering establishing a trilateral peace mission. Indonesia would be our anchor in the East." Prabowo was stunned. For decades, Indonesia had played a quiet diplomatic role. Now it was being trusted to lead. Then came the unexpected twist. "I must also inform you," Harris continued, "your name has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by multiple countries, including the United States." Prabowo didn't respond at first. The moment was too big, too surreal. He simply looked out the window toward Jakarta's skyline and whispered to himself, "For peace, who would have thought?" Just as the world praised Prabowo's rise as a peace symbol, a sudden cyber attack struck the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Screens went dark. Documents were tampered with. Panic ensued. Within hours, an anonymous message appeared online, targeting the president. "There's more behind the tears. We have proof." A global hacker group known as the Ashes released a single encrypted file titled Operation Dove. Media outlets speculated wildly. Was it a cover-up? A manipulation tactic? Or worse, evidence that the peace initiative was a front? Within the file was a recorded phone call between 2 unknown men planning to assassinate Prabowo before his speech in New York. What shocked the nation was what followed. The file revealed that the assassination had been called off by the same mysterious voice, moments before the event. The reason? He carries a different aura. Let him speak. The public demanded answers. Who was behind it? And why would a planned hit be stopped because of an aura? In the middle of the controversy, Prabowo made an unannounced trip to Solo, his mother's hometown. He visited a quiet cemetery, evading press and protocol. There, at a modest grave, he placed a small jasmine bouquet. It was the grave of an old friend, Major Haroon, who had died during a covert operation in Prabowo's early military days. A local man approached him, whispering, "You remember the promise you made to him?" Prabowo nodded solemnly. The man handed him a folded letter, aged and yellowed. Inside was Haroon's last written message to Prabowo. "If you ever hold the power, use it not to punish, but to protect. Peace is the final duty of a soldier." That night, President Prabowo addressed the nation. Not from a podium, but from that very graveyard. Cameras captured his silhouette among tombstones as he spoke. "Every soldier has ghosts. Mine taught me how to serve the living." His vulnerability, broadcast live, silenced critics and reignited admiration across the country. Days later, a small boy appeared at the gates of the presidential palace in Jakarta, holding nothing but a backpack and a crumpled photo of Prabowo. Security nearly turned him away, but one guard noticed something odd. The child's photo showed him standing with Prabowo during a military outreach mission in Papua years ago. The boy, named Yafet, had traveled for days by bus and on foot. "I need to give him something," he insisted. Finally, Prabowo himself came out to greet him. Yafet opened his bag and pulled out a wooden carving, a dove with both wings spread wide. "My father carved this before he died. He said you were the only one who could give peace wings." Prabowo knelt before the boy, speechless. Cameras rolled as he hugged Yafet tightly. "He gave it to the right man," Prabowo said softly. The moment went viral instantly, and world leaders began publicly urging the Nobel Committee to award him. The carving was placed in Prabowo's private office, next to the letter from Amir and the Hebrew poem. At the upcoming ASEAN summit, Prabowo faced an unexpected challenge. A delegation from a hostile Southeast Asian nation demanded answers about leaked intelligence and accused Indonesia of undermining their sovereignty through back-channel diplomacy. Tensions rose in the ornate hall filled with foreign ministers. Prabowo stood calmly and requested that the microphones be turned off. The room hushed. "If you fear Indonesia," he said, "fear not our strength but our sincerity. And if you come here seeking war, know that we brought no weapons, only chairs." With a wave of his hand, he had the security team bring more chairs to the main table. In a stunning twist, he invited the hostile delegation to sit beside him, not across from him. "You cannot shake hands if you're sitting opposite. Sit beside me. Let us see the same horizon." The crowd, stunned into silence, then erupted in applause. Even the hostile diplomat cracked a smile and took the seat beside him. Once again, the unexpected became unforgettable. As world support surged for President Prabowo's peace campaign, Indonesia prepared for a national celebration. Streets were adorned with white doves and red and white flags. The atmosphere was joyous until news broke of a coup attempt. A rogue faction within the military, nostalgic for the authoritarian past, had seized control of an airbase in East Java. The nation held its breath. Instead of ordering a counterattack, Prabowo did something unthinkable. He flew there himself. Alone. No bodyguards. No press. As his aircraft landed, soldiers watched, stunned, as their commander-in-chief walked across the tarmac toward them. "Who among you dares to raise arms against peace?" he said, his voice echoing through the wind. Then came the twist. The rebel commander was Prabowo's former protege, a brilliant but impulsive colonel named Waira. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. Waira dropped his weapon. "I thought you'd forgotten the warrior's way," he said. Prabowo approached him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and whispered, "A true warrior chooses silence over chaos." The coup collapsed within minutes. No bullets fired, no lives lost. Finally, the day of the Global Peace Forum arrived. Held in New York, the event drew leaders from 195 countries. Cameras flashed. Journalists buzzed. But all eyes were on President Prabowo. He stepped onto the grand podium, flanked by doves released into the air moments before his speech. The room hushed. Then, something unexpected happened. Sitting in the front row was Donald Trump, visibly moved, his eyes shimmering with tears. As Prabowo delivered a powerful message about forgiveness, human dignity, and the power of humility, Trump wiped his cheek and whispered, This is real leadership." It shocked the world, an unpredictable show of emotion from someone known for bravado. But the biggest surprise came after the applause. The UN Secretary General approached the stage, holding a golden envelope. "Mr. President, the Nobel Committee asked us to present this here tonight." The room fell silent. "You are the first ever leader to receive the Nobel Peace Prize live, on stage, in front of the world." Prabowo looked down, deeply moved. "This is not mine," he said, raising the dove carving Yafet had given him. "This belongs to the forgotten children of the world." And with that, the world didn't just applaud, they stood united. Thanks you for watching.